Hi, I'm Commander Lydia Thornfield. 3 months ago, my younger sister Cassandra handcuffed me to a chair at her wedding reception in front of 200 guests, calling me a delusional fraud who needed to stop pretending to be someone important. The humiliation was unbearable, but that wasn't even the worst part. What happened next when her new husband's lieutenant walked in and saluted me with the words, "Admiral, we're ready for your orders," didn't just shock everyone in that ballroom, it destroyed my family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You see, for the past 5 years, my family believed I was nothing more than a glorified secretary at the Meridian Naval Base outside Portland. They thought I pushed papers, answered phones, and lived in a cramped studio apartment because I was too lazy or incompetent to achieve anything meaningful. My sister Cassandra, the golden child who became a successful corporate lawyer, never let me forget my supposed failures. Every family gathering was an opportunity for her to remind everyone how she'd made something of herself, while I was still playing dress-up in a uniform. The truth was far more complicated and far more classified. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I held one of the highest security clearances in the Pacific Fleet. For 5 years, I had been living under deep operational cover, my real rank and position hidden even from my own family for national security reasons. The cramped studio apartment was actually a secure safe house. The glorified secretary role was my cover identity while I coordinated some of the Navy's most sensitive intelligence operations across 3 time zones. I couldn't tell them I was actually Admiral Lydia Thornfield, the youngest woman ever promoted to flag rank in the Pacific Fleet. I couldn't explain that the reason I missed family dinners wasn't because I was antisocial and weird, but because I was often halfway around the world managing operations that kept our country safe. The secrecy was killing me slowly, watching my own family lose respect for me year after year. But the mission came first. It always came first. The wedding was supposed to be my breaking point, not because of what happened to me, but because it was finally time. My assignment was ending. The operation I'd been running for half a decade was complete. And in just 3 days, I would be returning to my public role at the Pentagon with full honors and recognition. I had even prepared a small speech in my head, imagining the moment when I could finally let them know that their failure of a daughter and sister had actually been serving her country in ways they couldn't imagine. I pictured Cassandra's face when she realized that all her condescending comments about my little costume and pretend authority had been directed at one of the most powerful women in the United States Navy. But Cassandra had other plans. The trouble started during the cocktail hour, when I politely declined to participate in her elaborate maid of honor duties. I had tried to explain that I needed to step away for a few minutes to take an important call, a final briefing from the Joint Chiefs that couldn't be delayed even for family events. In my world, when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs calls, you answer, period. Cassandra saw it differently. To her, it was just another example of her weird sister being antisocial and making everything about herself. "You can't even put your phone away for 1 day," she hissed at me in the bridal suite. "This is the most important day of my life, and you're acting like you have somewhere more important to be." If she only knew. The situation escalated during dinner when her new husband, Lieutenant Commander James Rothwell, whom I'd never met before that day, started telling stories about Navy life. He was bragging about his submarine service, throwing around military terminology with the casual confidence of someone who thought he was the most impressive person in the room. I stayed quiet, but something about my posture, the way I held myself, must have caught his attention. "You look familiar," he said, studying my face with growing curiosity. "Have we met? You seem to know what you're talking about when it comes to naval operations." Before I could deflect, Cassandra jumped in with her trademark mockery. "Oh, Lydia likes to pretend she's some kind of military hotshot. She's been playing this character for years now, wearing her little uniform and acting all important. It's honestly embarrassing. She works at a desk on some base in Oregon, answering phones and filing paperwork. The table went quiet. I felt my face burn with humiliation. Not because her words were true, but because I couldn't defend myself without blowing my cover 3 days before it officially ended. 3 more days, and I could have told them everything.
That's when James looked more closely at my uniform, at the ribbons and insignia that most civilians wouldn't understand, but that any naval officer would recognize immediately. His expression changed dramatically, color draining from his face as he processed what he was seeing. "Cassie," he said quietly, his voice tight with something that might have been horror. "Those aren't fake decorations." But my sister was just getting started. What happened next would haunt both of us for the rest of our lives. Because sometimes the person you think you're humiliating turns out to be the one person you should have been saluting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before we dive deeper into this story, I need to ask you something. Put yourself in my position for a moment. If your own sister publicly humiliated you at her wedding, calling you a fraud and a pretender in front of everyone you both knew, while you were bound by classified orders that prevented you from defending yourself, what would you have done? Would you have broken your oath to your country just to save face? Would you have endured the shame in silence, knowing that revealing the truth could compromise national security? Or would you have found another way to handle a family member who thought so little of you that she was willing to destroy your reputation on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life? Because here's the thing. When you're sworn to protect your nation's secrets, even from your own family, every personal relationship becomes a minefield. Every casual question about your work, every family gathering, every moment of connection has to be filtered through layers of operational security that your loved ones don't even know exist. And when those same family members decide that your silence makes you fair game for public humiliation, you're faced with an impossible choice: break your oath or watch them tear you apart with their assumptions. I want you to really think about this as I tell you what happened next, because what my sister did in that ballroom wasn't just cruel. It was the kind of betrayal that changes everything between people forever. The kind that makes you question whether someone ever really knew you at all, or if they were always just waiting for an opportunity to cut you down. So tell me, what would you have done? To understand how devastating that wedding became, you need to know how close Cassandra and I used to be. Growing up in Millbrook, a small town outside Seattle, we were inseparable. She was only 3 years younger, but she looked up to me like I was her personal superhero. When other kids picked on her at school, I was the one who stood up for her. When she had nightmares, she'd crawl into my bed and I'd tell her stories about brave princesses and fearless explorers until she fell asleep. Our father, Captain Robert Thornfield, served 25 years in the Coast Guard before retiring to become Millbrook's harbor master. Our mother, Dr. Patricia Thornfield, was the town's only pediatrician. We grew up understanding service, duty, and the weight of responsibility that comes with protecting others. Both Cassie and I were raised on stories of honor, integrity, and putting others before yourself. When I graduated from the Naval Academy at Annapolis, Cassandra was right there in the front row, crying with pride. She wore a navy blue dress she'd saved up to buy specifically for my commissioning ceremony, and she told everyone who would listen that her big sister was going to change the world. I remember her gripping my hand after the ceremony, her eyes shining with admiration. "She promised me you'll always be this amazing," she whispered. "Promise me you'll always be someone I can look up to." I promised her. God help me, I meant it with every fiber of my being. For the first few years of my naval career, we talked constantly. She was finishing her pre-law degree at Washington State, and I was working my way up through intelligence operations. I could share some details then, the safe ones, the unclassified missions, the day-to-day challenges of being a young female officer in a male-dominated field. Cassie was my biggest cheerleader, my confidant, my anchor to the civilian world I was slowly leaving behind. She'd call me after every promotion, every commendation, every milestone. When I made lieutenant commander at 28, she threw me a surprise party during my brief leave. She invited half of Millbrook, including our old high school teachers, our neighbors, and every family friend who'd known us since we were children. She gave a toast that night that brought tears to my eyes. "My sister Lydia has always been extraordinary," she said, raising her glass to the crowded room. "When we were kids, I used to think she was magic. She could fix anything, solve any problem, make any monster disappear. Now I know she wasn't magic. She was just preparing to become exactly who she was meant to be. The Navy is lucky to have her, but not as lucky as I am to be her sister. I should have known then that it would be the last time she'd speak about me that way."
The change started gradually, so subtly that I didn't recognize it at first. When the classified assignments began, when my work shifted into areas I couldn't discuss, when my communications became restricted, when my visits home became shorter and less frequent, I thought Cassie would understand. Our father had dealt with classified work in the Coast Guard. She knew that some aspects of military service couldn't be shared at family dinner tables. But what I didn't anticipate was how my silence would feel like rejection to her. The first crack appeared during Christmas 3 years ago. I'd been called away on an emergency deployment just days before the holiday. I couldn't explain why, couldn't tell them where I was going, couldn't even give them a timeline for when I'd return. All I could say was, "Duty calls," before disappearing for 6 weeks into what would become one of the most critical intelligence operations of my career. When I finally made it home in late January, Cassie was different, distant. She hugged me at the airport, but it felt perfunctory, like an obligation rather than genuine affection. During dinner, when our parents asked about my deployment, I gave my usual vague response about routine operations and classified details. Cassie set down her fork and stared at me. "You know, Lydia, most people in the military can at least tell their families what continent they're on. Are we really supposed to believe that your job is so incredibly important that you can't share anything, ever?" The hurt in her voice caught me off guard. I tried to explain without explaining, to reassure her without revealing anything that could compromise operational security. "Cassie, you know I'd tell you everything if I could. The work I'm doing, it matters. It's important. But some things have to stay classified, even from family." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Important, right. I'm sure filing reports and attending meetings is incredibly sensitive work." That's when I realized she had no idea what I actually did for a living. In her mind, I had become some kind of glorified administrative assistant who was too self-important to admit she had a boring desk job. The careful operational security I maintained, the necessity of staying vague about my work, my location, my responsibilities, had created a void that she filled with her own assumptions. And those assumptions were destroying us. Over the next 2 years, every interaction became strained. Family gatherings turned into subtle interrogations where Cassie would make pointed comments about my mysterious career. She started questioning everything: why I couldn't commit to holiday plans, why I always seemed distracted when I was home, why I'd changed from the open, communicative sister she had grown up with. The worst part was that I could see her disappointment growing. The sister who used to look at me with pride and admiration now looked at me with skepticism and frustration. In her eyes, I had become someone who thought she was too important to maintain relationships, too secretive to be trusted, too caught up in her own importance to remember where she came from. What she couldn't understand was that every moment of distance was killing me.
Every lie I had to tell, every detail I had to omit, every time I had to choose my mission over my family, it was tearing me apart from the inside. But I had sworn an oath, not just to my country, but to the thousands of lives that depended on the operations I coordinated remaining secret. By the time Cassie announced her engagement to James, our relationship had deteriorated to the point where she almost didn't ask me to be her maid of honor. She told me later that she had debated it for weeks, wondering if she wanted someone in her wedding party who couldn't even be bothered to show genuine interest in her life. She had no idea that I knew more about her fiancé's military record than she did, that I'd been briefed on his submarine service, his security clearance, his deployment history. She had no idea that part of me wanted to warn her about some of the things I'd learned, things that would have been impossible to explain without revealing how I'd come to know them. Instead, I accepted the maid of honor role and promised myself that after the wedding, after my assignment ended, I would find a way to repair what had been broken between us. I would sit her down and explain everything. The real reason for my secrecy, the true nature of my work, the impossible position I'd been in for years. I thought we had time. I thought the wedding would be a fresh start, a chance to begin rebuilding our relationship with honesty instead of operational necessity. I was wrong about everything. The morning of Cassandra's wedding dawned gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that should have been an omen for what was coming. I'd arrived at the Rosewood Manor venue at dawn to help with final preparations, my dress blues pressed to perfection, my ceremonial sword polished to a mere shine. As maid of honor, I was determined to make this day perfect for Cassie, regardless of the tension that had been building between us.
The venue was stunning, a historic estate overlooking Puget Sound with gardens that would have been breathtaking if the weather had cooperated. 200 guests were expected, including half of Millbrook's population, our extended family, and what I assumed would be James's naval colleagues. I had spent weeks planning every detail I could control, from the bachelor party logistics to the rehearsal dinner seating chart, trying to prove to Cassie that I could still be the sister she needed me to be. What I hadn't anticipated was the secure communication device hidden in my bouquet. At 0000 hours, while I was helping arrange centerpieces in the main ballroom, the encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message that made my blood run cold. Operation Clearwater, the 5-year intelligence operation I'd been running, had been compromised. Not completely, but enough to require immediate damage assessment and potential extraction of assets currently in the field. The message was from Admiral Patricia Hayes, my direct superior and one of only 3 people who knew my real identity, Thornfield. Emergency briefing required. Beijing contact reports exposure risk. Conference call with Joint Chiefs at 1400 hours your time. Cannot be delayed or rescheduled. National security priority 1. My hands shook as I read the message. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 1500 hours. The briefing would run until at least 1600, maybe longer if the situation was as serious as it sounded. There were lives at stake. American intelligence officers operating under deep cover in hostile territory. Assets who had risked everything to provide crucial information about naval movements in the South China Sea. I looked across the ballroom at Cassie, radiant in her wedding dress, laughing with our cousins as they adjusted her veil. She caught my eye and smiled, the first genuinely warm smile she'd given me in months. For a moment, she looked like the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I had 2 choices: attend my sister's wedding or potentially save the lives of American operatives halfway around the world. There was no choice at all. I found a quiet corner in the venue's library and placed the secure call to Admiral Hayes. The situation was worse than I had initially understood. Our Beijing asset had been arrested, and Chinese intelligence was systematically rolling up the network. 3 operatives were already in the wind, trying to reach extraction points, but their safety depended on intel that only I possessed: routes, safe houses, emergency protocols that existed nowhere except in my memory. "Admiral, I need you in the Situation Room in 2 hours," Hayes said, her voice tight with stress I'd rarely heard from her. "This is a full-scale intelligence disaster.
We're talking about potential international incident, compromise of Pacific Fleet operations, and the lives of 7 Americans currently behind enemy lines. Ma'am, I'm at my sister's wedding. I'm the maid of honor. The ceremony. I don't care if you're at the president's inauguration, Admiral Thornfield. American lives are at stake. You know the protocol. Mission first, always. She was right. I knew she was right. It's what I signed up for when I accepted the assignment, what I agreed to when I took the oath. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, even when the few happen to be your only family. But knowing something is right doesn't make it hurt any less. I spent the next hour trying to find a compromise that didn't exist. I called every senior officer I knew, hoping someone else could handle the briefing. I explored technological solutions, secure video conferencing, encrypted communications, anything that would let me participate remotely. Nothing worked. The information was too sensitive, the security requirements too strict. I needed to be physically present in the SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility with proper clearances and protocols. At 1200 hours, I made the call that would change everything between Cassie and me forever. I found her in the bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids and our mother, all of them glowing with pre-ceremony excitement. She was having her makeup touched up, practicing her vows under her breath, completely absorbed in what should have been the happiest day of her life. "Cassie," I said quietly, pulling her aside, "I need to talk to you." Something in my voice must have alarmed her because her smile faded immediately. "What's wrong? You look like someone died." "I have to leave. There's an emergency at work and I'm required to—" "No." The word came out flat, final. "Absolutely not." "Cassie, please, if I could stay, I would, but it's critical. Lives are depending on—" "Lives." She laughed, but it was harsh, bitter. "Right. Because your pretend important job is more critical than your sister's wedding. Do you hear yourself, Lydia? Do you have any idea how insane you sound?" I tried to explain without explaining, dancing around classification levels and operational security, but everything I said only made it worse. To her, I sounded like someone making elaborate excuses to avoid a commitment I didn't want to keep.
"Let me guess," she said, her voice growing louder, attracting the attention of everyone in the room. "You can't tell me what's so important because it's classified. You can't explain why it can't wait because it's sensitive. You can't give me any details because it's above my security clearance." The accurate summary of my impossible position hung in the air like an accusation. "You know what I think, Lydia? I think you're a coward. I think you've been lying to all of us for years about what you actually do, and now you're using that lie to get out of being here for me when I need you most." Our mother tried to intervene, but Cassie was beyond reason. Years of resentment, frustration, and perceived abandonment poured out in a torrent of accusations that cut deeper than any enemy fire I'd ever faced. "You want to leave? Fine, go. Run away to your mysterious, super important job. But don't you dare expect me to pretend this is okay. Don't expect me to smile and make excuses for you to our family and friends when they ask where my maid of honor went." I left my dress blues hanging in the bridal suite and changed into my service uniform in my car, hands shaking as I tried to fasten buttons through tears I couldn't afford to shed. By the time I reached the secure facility, I was composed, professional, ready to do what needed to be done. The briefing lasted 4 hours. We managed to extract 6 of the 7 operatives. The 7th, an unsigned named David Park, who'd volunteered for the assignment to support his sick mother, didn't make it to the extraction point. I saved 6 American lives that day and missed my sister's wedding. She would never forgive me for either. 3 months later, when Cassandra called to invite me to her reception party, a belated celebration she was throwing since certain people had missed the actual wedding, I should have known it was a trap. But hope is a dangerous thing when it comes to family, and I desperately wanted to believe she was ready to forgive me. Lydia, I know we haven't talked much since the wedding, but James and I are having a reception party at the Grandview Ballroom next Saturday. It's formal, military dress encouraged. I'd like you to come. Military dress encouraged. Those words should have been a red flag, but instead, they felt like an olive branch. Maybe she was finally ready to acknowledge my service, to show that she respected what I did, even if she couldn't understand it. Maybe this was her way of saying she wanted to rebuild our relationship. I'd love to come, I told her, relief flooding through me. Cassie, I'm so sorry about the wedding. I know you don't believe me, but if there had been any way... We'll talk about it at the party. Just promise me you'll be there. No emergencies, no classified calls, no mysterious disappearances. I promised. 3 days after my assignment officially ended, 3 days before I was scheduled to report to the Pentagon in my new public role, I finally felt safe making that promise. Operation Clearwater was closed. My cover was blown anyway after the Beijing incident. There would be no more emergency calls, no more classified briefings that could pull me away from family obligations. I spent the week preparing for the party like it was a military inspection. I had my dress blues cleaned and pressed at the Navy's premier service facility in Bremerton. Every ribbon was positioned with mathematical precision, every piece of brass polished to a mirror finish. I even wore the ceremonial decorations I'd earned but never displayed publicly. Medals for operations that officially didn't exist, commendations for achievements I couldn't discuss. Looking back, I realize I was unconsciously preparing for battle. The Grandview Ballroom was elegant in the way that old money whispers rather than shouts. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished hardwood floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Elliott Bay. The guest list was smaller than the wedding would have been, maybe 50 people instead of 200, but it included all the same faces that mattered. Our parents, extended family, childhood friends, and several men in naval uniforms I didn't recognize, but assumed were James's colleagues. When I walked in, the conversation seemed to pause for just a moment. I was used to that reaction. Full-dress blues tend to command attention, but something about the quality of the silence felt different, expectant, almost predatory.
"Gentlemen," Cassandra announced, her voice carrying across the small circle. "I'd like you to meet my sister, Lydia. She works at the Naval Base in Meridian. Lydia, these are James's colleagues from his submarine service." The introductions were polite but perfunctory. Commander Mitchell Barnes, Lieutenant Commander Stephen Cross, Lieutenant Commander David Huang. They shook my hand with professional courtesy, but I could see them cataloging my uniform, noting the ribbons and insignia with the practiced eye of men who understood military hierarchy. What I didn't notice immediately was how they kept glancing at James, as if waiting for some kind of signal. "So, Lydia," Commander Barnes said after the initial pleasantries were complete, "Cassie tells us you're in administration at Meridian. That must be interesting work." There it was, the casual probe that every military officer learns to recognize. He wasn't asking about my job. He was testing my response to see how I would characterize my service. "It has its moments," I replied diplomatically, falling back on years of practiced vagueness. Lieutenant Commander Cross joined the conversation. "Administration covers a lot of ground in the Navy. What's your specialty? Personnel, logistics, intelligence support?" The questions were getting more specific, more targeted. I felt like a gazelle who'd suddenly realized she was surrounded by lions. "Primarily liaison work," I said, which was technically true if you considered coordinating with foreign intelligence services as liaison work. A lot of interagency communication. James appeared at the edge of our circle, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to Cassandra and kept the other for himself.
but his eyes never left my face. "Interagency communication," he repeated thoughtfully. "That's fascinating. Must require pretty high clearance levels for that kind of work." Warning bells were going off in my head now. These weren't casual questions from curious colleagues. This felt like an interrogation, and I couldn't figure out why. "Some of it does," I admitted carefully. "Lydia's always been very mysterious about her work," Cassandra said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "She acts like she's running the Pacific Fleet instead of answering phones and filing reports." The naval officers exchanged glances that I caught but couldn't interpret. Commander Barnes cleared his throat. "Well, liaison work is certainly important, though I have to say those are some impressive ribbons for administrative work." I felt my face heat up. They were questioning my decorations, essentially accusing me of wearing medals I hadn't earned. In military culture, there's no greater insult than suggesting someone is misrepresenting their service record. "I've had some unique assignments over the years," I said stiffly. "I'm sure you have," James said, but there was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. "In fact, I've been looking forward to talking with you about some of those assignments." That's when I noticed that other conversations in the ballroom had quieted. Other guests were turning to look at our group, sensing the tension, even if they couldn't understand its source. Cassandra moved closer to James, and for the first time, I saw the trap I'd walked into. "So, you see, Lydia," my sister said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom, "James has been doing some research since the wedding. Some very interesting research about naval personnel records and security clearances." My blood turned to ice water. Whatever they thought they knew, whatever they thought they'd discovered, this was about to become a public humiliation designed to destroy not just my relationship with my family, but my entire reputation. Cassie, I said quietly, "maybe we should discuss this privately?" "Oh no," she said with a smile that would look warm to anyone who knew her as well as I did. "I think this is exactly the kind of conversation that should happen publicly. After all, if someone is going to lie about their military service, shouldn't everyone know about it?" The ballroom had fallen completely silent now. 50 pairs of eyes focused on our small circle like we were the evening's entertainment. I could feel the weight of their attention, the anticipation of people who sensed drama about to unfold. My parents stood frozen near the dessert table, confusion and growing alarm written across their faces. "Cassie, please," I said, keeping my voice low and steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "Whatever you think you know, whatever James has told you, let's talk about this privately. This isn't the time or place for..." "For what?" she interrupted, her voice bright and caring. "For truth, for honesty, for finally calling out someone who's been lying to her family for years." James stepped forward, pulling out his phone with the theatrical precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "You see, everyone, after Lydia missed our wedding for her classified emergency, I decided to do a little digging. Being married to a Thornfield now, I felt I had a right to know what kind of family I was joining." My stomach dropped. Whatever they thought they had discovered, they were about to make it public in the most humiliating way possible. But I still held on to hope that maybe somehow I could defuse the situation before it exploded completely. "James," I said carefully, "I understand your curiosity, but there are things about military service that civilians don't always..."
"Civilians?" Cassandra's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, that's rich, Lydia. Tell me, do civilians have access to naval personnel databases? Do civilians have security clearances that let them research active duty service records?" The blood drained from my face. James wasn't just any naval officer questioning my service, he had access to official records. But more importantly, he clearly didn't have access to the classified files that would show my real assignment. He was working with incomplete information, which made him dangerous in ways he couldn't possibly understand. "What exactly did you find?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level while my mind raced through damage control scenarios. James held up his phone like he was about to read from scripture. According to official Navy records, Lieutenant Commander Lydia Thornfield, that's your rank, right? The one you've been claiming, has been assigned to administrative support services at Naval Base Meridian for the past 5 years. Desk duty, paperwork processing, routine personnel management. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see people nodding, some looking disappointed, others seeming almost relieved that the mystery of my secretive behavior had such a mundane explanation. Her service record shows no deployments, no overseas assignments, no special operations experience, no intelligence work, just 5 years of pushing papers and answering phones while pretending to be some kind of secret agent. "That's enough," I said firmly. But James was just getting started. "But here's the really interesting part," he said, swiping to another screen on his phone. "Those ribbons she's wearing? That Navy Cross? That Defense Distinguished Service Medal? According to her official record, she's never been awarded any of them." The murmur became a gasp. In military culture, wearing unearned ribbons isn't just embarrassing, it's a federal crime. Stolen valor is taken seriously by both military and civilian courts, and the accusation alone could destroy a career. So either the Navy's computer system is completely wrong, or my new sister-in-law is wearing decorations she never earned, while lying about her service record to make herself sound more important than she really is. I felt the walls closing in. Everything he was saying was technically accurate based on the records he had access to. My cover identity showed exactly what he described: a glorified secretary with a routine assignment and no significant achievements. The real records, the classified files that showed my actual service and the operations that had earned those ribbons, were buried so deep that even a submarine officer with significant clearance couldn't access them. "James, you don't understand," I said desperately. "There are aspects of military service that don't appear in standard personnel files, classification levels, compartmentalized operations." "Oh, here we go again," Cassandra said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "More mysterious classifications, more secret operations, more excuses for why none of us are important enough to know the truth." She turned to address the crowd directly, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, my sister has been lying to all of us for 5 years. Lying about her job, lying about her achievements, lying about the importance she has. She's a clerk who pretends to be a spy." "Cassie, please." "No!" she snapped, whirling back to face me. "I'm done with your lies, Lydia. I'm done with your excuses. I'm done watching you manipulate our family's love and respect while you play dress-up in ribbons you never earned." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Looking around the ballroom, I could see the faces of people who'd known me since childhood, people who'd respected my service. Now they were seeing me through Cassandra's narrative, as a pathetic fraud who'd built her entire identity on lies. "Cassandra," our father said, stepping forward with the authority of someone who'd spent decades in uniform himself, "these are serious accusations. If you're wrong—" "I'm not wrong, Dad," she said firmly. "James has the documentation. The proof is right there in the official records. She's been lying to all of us." I tried one last time to find a way out that wouldn't require revealing classified information. "If you could just give me a chance to explain privately, to show you documentation that—" "What documentation?" James demanded. "More fake papers? More forged orders? Face it, Lydia, you've been caught. The only question now is whether you're going to keep lying or finally tell everyone the truth about what you really do for a living." The trap was perfect. They had official records that supported their accusations, and I had classified files I couldn't reveal without breaking federal law. Anything I said in my defense would sound like more lies, more elaborate excuses from someone who'd been caught in deception. I serve my country, I said quietly, which was the only truth I could offer. Filing reports and answering phones, Cassandra said with vicious satisfaction. Yes, we know. The question is, why couldn't you just be honest about it? Why did you have to pretend to be someone important? Why did you have to lie? I looked around the ballroom at faces full of disappointment and dawning disgust. These people had respected me, had looked up to me as a role model for military service. Now they were seeing me through Cassandra's narrative, as a pathetic fraud who'd built her entire identity on lies.
I never lied about my service, I said, which was technically true but sounded weak even to my own ears. Really? James said, pulling up another screen on his phone. Because I also found something interesting about those emergency calls that pull you away from family events. According to base communications logs, there have been no official emergency notifications sent to Lieutenant Commander Thornfield's duty phone in the past 18 months. Another gasp from the crowd. Even I felt shaken by that revelation. Though I knew the explanation, my real communications came through encrypted channels that wouldn't appear in standard logs. So either you're lying about the emergency calls, Cassandra said with cruel satisfaction, or you're lying about everything else. Which is it, sister? What happened next revealed that this wasn't just about military records or missed weddings. This was something much more calculated, much more personal. You know what the saddest part is? Cassandra said, her voice taking on a tone of mock sympathy that made my skin crawl. I actually defended you for years. When people in town started asking questions about why the great Lydia Thornfield never seemed to accomplish anything noteworthy, never got promoted beyond lieutenant commander, never received any public recognition for all this classified work she claimed to be doing. She began pacing in front of me like a prosecutor addressing a jury, and I realized this performance had been rehearsed. Every word, every gesture, every pause was calculated for maximum impact. You know what the saddest part is? Cassandra said, her voice taking on a tone of mock sympathy that made my skin crawl. I actually defended you for years. When people in town started asking questions about why the great Lydia Thornfield never seemed to accomplish anything noteworthy, never got promoted beyond lieutenant commander, never received any public recognition for all this classified work she claimed to be doing. She began pacing in front of me like a prosecutor addressing a jury, and I realized this performance had been rehearsed. Every word, every gesture, every pause was calculated for maximum impact. I told them they didn't understand military service, she continued. I said my sister was probably doing important work that couldn't be publicized. I made excuses for why you never brought colleagues to family events, why you couldn't talk about your deployments, why you always seemed to be running off to mysterious meetings. The crowd was hanging on every word now. I could see people nodding along, remembering their own questions about my career, their own doubts that Cassandra had apparently been fielding for years. But then you missed my wedding, her voice hardened, all pretense of sympathy disappearing. You looked me in the eye and told me that American lives were at stake, that you were needed for some critical briefing, that your duty to your country came before your duty to your family. She stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. So I decided to find out exactly what kind of duty was so important that it came before the most important day of my life. James stepped forward again, and I noticed for the first time that he was carrying a folder, a thick, official-looking folder that made my heart race with panic. It took some digging, he said, opening the folder with theatrical precision, but when you know where to look, when you have the right connections, you can find out a lot about someone's real activities. He pulled out a stack of papers, and I could see official letterheads, timestamps, what looked like duty rosters and assignment sheets. Want to know what Lieutenant Commander Lydia Thornfield was really doing on my wedding day, the day she claimed she had to save American lives in a classified emergency?
The ballroom was so quiet, I could hear the air conditioning humming. Even I held my breath, terrified of what he was about to reveal. According to duty logs from Naval Base Meridian, Lieutenant Commander Thornfield was scheduled for a routine administrative meeting regarding office supply procurement. The meeting lasted 2 hours and covered toner cartridge orders and furniture replacement requests. The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone in the crowd let out a shocked laugh. Then another. Within seconds, the ballroom was buzzing with whispered conversations and barely suppressed laughter. Office supplies. I missed my sister's wedding for office supplies. Except that wasn't true. The meeting James was referencing was part of my cover identity, a routine administrative duty designed to explain my presence at the base while I participated in the actual emergency briefing. But I couldn't explain that without revealing classified information. James, I said desperately, those logs don't show the complete picture. There are compartmentalized activities that— Stop, Cassandra said, holding up her hand. Just stop with the lies, Lydia. Office supply procurement is not classified. Toner cartridge orders are not a matter of national security. She moved closer to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. You want to know what the real betrayal is? It's not that you missed my wedding. It's that you made me believe you missed it for something important. Then she raised her voice again for the crowd. My sister chose office supplies over my wedding. She chose toner cartridges over being my maid of honor. And then she lied about it, made up some elaborate story about classified emergencies and American lives because she was too embarrassed to admit the truth. The humiliation was overwhelming, but it was about to get worse. James pulled another document from his folder. But wait, there's more. I also found records of Lieutenant Commander Thornfield's performance reviews over the past 5 years. He held up what appeared to be official evaluation forms. Consistently rated as meets expectations, with comments like adequate administrative support and reliable desk officer. No mentions of intelligence work, no commendations for classified operations, no evidence of the kind of critical work that would justify all the secrecy.
My legs felt weak. Everything he was saying was true according to the records he had access to, but it was all part of an elaborate cover story designed to hide my real activities. The performance reviews he was reading were written by officers who knew they were participating in a cover operation. But James didn't understand that context. 5 years of mediocre performance reviews, Cassandra said with satisfaction. 5 years of adequate work. That's what was so important. She couldn't be bothered to maintain relationships with her family. But the worst revelation was yet to come. James reached into the folder one more time and pulled out what looked like financial records. I also took the liberty of checking Lieutenant Commander Thornfield's military housing allowance and base privileges usage. My heart stopped. Whatever he was about to reveal, I knew it would be the final nail in the coffin of my credibility. For someone who claims to be constantly deployed on classified missions, she sure uses a lot of base facilities, James said with a smirk. Gym records show regular usage Monday through Friday during normal business hours. Commissary purchases indicate someone who shops weekly for groceries, not someone who's frequently traveling. And her base housing allowance has been consistently paid for the same apartment for 5 years straight. The implication was clear. I had been living a routine, mundane life while pretending to be involved in high-stakes intelligence operations. She's been living like any other base employee, Cassandra said triumphantly, working 9 to 5, shopping for groceries, going to the gym, and then coming home to tell us all about her mysterious, important work that she couldn't discuss. The crowd was beginning to murmur with what sounded like disgust. I could see people shaking their heads, some looking angry, others just disappointed. But here's what really makes me sick, Cassandra continued, her voice rising with emotion that seemed genuine for the first time that evening. She let us worry about her.
She let Mom and Dad stay awake at night wondering if their daughter was safe, wondering if she was in danger, wondering why she couldn't tell them anything about her life. She turned to our parents, who were standing frozen near the back of the crowd. She let you believe she was serving her country in ways that put her at risk, when the truth is she was filing reports and ordering office supplies. Our mother's face was pale with shock and what looked like betrayal. Our father, the retired Coast Guard officer who understood military service better than anyone in the room, looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. All those times we made excuses for her, Cassandra said, addressing the entire room now. All those times we told people she was probably doing important work we couldn't understand. All those times we respected her boundaries and her need for privacy. She paused for dramatic effect. We were protecting the reputation of someone who was lying to us every single day. I needed to fight back, but I had to be careful. Every word I spoke could either save my reputation or destroy it completely. And I was walking a tightrope between national security laws and family loyalty that was getting thinner by the second. James, I need to ask you something important. When you accessed those records, what was your security clearance level? He looked momentarily confused by the question. Secret level, obviously, standard for submarine officers. Why does that matter? And the records you accessed, were they marked with any special compartmentalization codes? Any notations about restricted access or limited distribution? The naval officers in the room were beginning to pay closer attention now. They understood the implications of my questions, even if the civilians didn't. James flipped through his folder with less confidence than before. They were standard personnel files, no special markings that I noticed. That's interesting, I said, taking a small step forward. Because if what you're saying is true, if I really am just an administrative clerk with no significant assignments, then why would my personnel file require secret-level clearance to access at all? Commander Barnes, one of James' colleagues, frowned and moved closer to examine the documents. She's got a point, James. Standard admin files are usually unclassified or confidential at most. It doesn't matter, Cassandra interjected, but I could hear the first note of uncertainty in her voice. She's trying to distract us with more military jargon. No, I'm trying to show you that you're working with incomplete information, I said firmly. James, you found records that show what my cover assignment looks like. But did you find any documentation about why a lieutenant commander with a supposedly routine desk job has been continuously assigned to the same position for 5 years without rotation? The question hung in the air. Standard military protocol calls for officers to rotate assignments every 2 to 3 years for career development. 5 years in the same position was highly unusual, unless there were special circumstances.
Lieutenant Commander Cross stepped forward. Actually, that is strange. Why haven't you rotated to a new assignment? I took a breath, knowing I was about to walk as close to the line as I dared. Because some assignments require continuity that goes beyond normal rotation schedules. Some positions require officers to maintain cover identities for operational security reasons. Cover identities? James laughed, but it sounded forced now. You're really going to stick with the spy story? I'm going to stick with the truth, I said. Even if it's a truth I can't fully explain in a room full of people without proper clearances. Our father pushed through the crowd, his Coast Guard experience giving him authority that silenced the murmuring guests. Lydia, are you telling us that your real assignment has been classified? I looked him in the eye. This man who had served his country for 25 years and understood the weight of duty. Dad, there are aspects of military service that can't be discussed openly. You know that better than anyone. He studied my face for a long moment, then turned to James. Son, what was your source for these personnel records?
James shifted uncomfortably. I have a friend in Naval Personnel Command. He pulled the files as a favor. A favor? Dad's voice sharpened. You had someone access classified personnel files as a personal favor? Do you understand that could be a court-martial offense? The room went very quiet. Even Cassandra looked uncertain now. It's not illegal if the records support what we're saying, she said, but the confidence was gone from her voice. Actually, it is illegal, Commander Barnes said gravely. Accessing personnel files outside of official duties, regardless of content, is a violation of federal law. James, you could be in serious trouble for this. I saw my opening and took it. But there's something else that's interesting about those records. James, you said you found performance reviews, duty logs, housing allowances, but did you find any travel vouchers, any temporary duty assignments, any overseas deployment orders? He flipped through the folder frantically. No, but that just proves it doesn't prove anything. It proves that the records you accessed don't include certain types of classified documentation. James, in your submarine service, when you went on classified missions, did those appear in your standard personnel file? He went pale. No, those were kept in separate compartmentalized files. Exactly. And who has access to those compartmentalized files? Only personnel with appropriate clearances and operational need to know, he said quietly. The naval officers were all staring at James now, and I could see understanding dawning on their faces. Commander Barnes cleared his throat. James, what exactly did you think you were accomplishing here? Even if Lieutenant Commander Thornfield was just an administrative officer, publicly humiliating a fellow service member based on illegally obtained records is conduct unbecoming. But I wasn't done yet. I turned to address the entire room, knowing I had one chance to salvage the situation without revealing classified information. I want everyone here to understand something, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. For 5 years, I have served my country to the best of my ability. I have missed family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and yes, even my sister's wedding because the mission required it. I have maintained operational security even when it cost me relationships with people I love. I looked directly at Cassandra. I have let my own family think less of me rather than compromise sensitive operations that protect American lives. And I would do it again because that's what the oath I took means. But the records, James started, the records you accessed show exactly what they were designed to show. Nothing more, nothing less. The fact that you can't see beyond them says more about your clearance level than it does about my service record. Cassandra was looking desperate now. She's doing it again! More excuses, more claims about classified work, more reasons why we're not important enough to know the truth. Cassie, our mother said quietly, what if she's telling the truth? What if there really are things she can't tell us? Then why doesn't she just say that? Why can't she just say, I do classified work that I can't discuss, instead of making up stories about office supplies and missing weddings? Because, I said sadly, saying I do classified work would itself be a violation of operational security. Some cover identities are so sensitive that even acknowledging they exist would compromise them. The room was buzzing with confused conversations now. Some people seemed to be reconsidering their assumptions, while others still looked skeptical. Commander Barnes stepped forward again. Lieutenant Commander Thornfield, without revealing any classified information, can you at least confirm whether your actual duties differ significantly from what appears in the standard personnel records? It was a carefully worded question from an officer who understood classification levels. He was giving me an opportunity to defend myself without breaking any laws. Commander, I said formally, I can confirm that my actual duties and responsibilities may not be fully reflected in the documentation that Lieutenant Commander Rothwell was able to access.
That's not an answer, Cassandra said angrily. That's more evasion, more double talk, more She stopped abruptly, and I saw something change in her expression, something desperate and dangerous. "You know what?" she said, her voice taking on a tone that made my blood run cold. "I'm tired of word games. I'm tired of military protocol and classification levels and all the excuses. If you're really who you claim to be, if you really have the authority you pretend to have, then prove it." "How?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. She smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on my sister's face. "Show us your orders." The demand to show my orders was brilliant in its impossibility. Cassandra knew exactly what she was asking for: documentation that either didn't exist in a form I could reveal, or that would be so classified that showing it would constitute treason. Either way, she'd have her proof that I was lying. "My orders?" I repeated, stalling for time while my mind raced through options that didn't exist. "Yes, your orders," she said triumphantly. "If you're really doing this important classified work, if you really have been on these mysterious assignments, then you have orders, written documentation, official paperwork that proves what you're claiming." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that this was the climactic moment. I could see smartphones being raised, people preparing to document whatever happened next. In the social media age, my humiliation would be preserved forever. "Cassie, you know I can't." "Can't or won't? Because there's a difference, Lydia. If you can't show us your orders because they're classified, that's one thing. But if you won't show them because they don't exist, that's something else entirely." James stepped forward with renewed confidence. "Actually, I can help clarify this," he said, pulling out his phone. I took the liberty of calling my contact at Personnel Command during dinner. My heart sank. Whatever he'd learned was about to be the final blow. According to Lieutenant Matthews in the Records Office, there are no classified assignment orders on file for Lieutenant Commander Thornfield beyond her initial posting to administrative services at Meridian. No special duty assignments, no temporary duty orders for classified operations, no deployment orders of any kind. The crowd gasped. Even the naval officers looked shocked. Commander Barnes stepped closer to me, his expression a mix of confusion and disappointment. "Lieutenant Commander, if that's accurate," he began. "It's not accurate. It's incomplete. Lieutenant Matthews wouldn't have access to what? To more imaginary files? To deeper levels of classification that conveniently can't be verified by anyone?" She turned to address the crowd directly, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, my sister has been lying to us all for 5 years. She's been pretending to be someone important, someone vital to national security, someone whose work matters." Her voice cracked with emotion that seemed genuine. "She let me plan a wedding without my maid of honor. She let our parents worry about her safety. She let all of you respect her for service she never actually performed." The crowd was murmuring agreement now. I could see people nodding, some looking angry, others just sad and disappointed. "But the worst part," Cassandra continued, tears starting to flow down her cheeks, "is that she's still lying. Even now, even caught with proof, she's still making excuses and creating elaborate stories about classifications and compartments and special access." She walked over to a nearby table and picked up something I hadn't noticed before: a pair of military-issue restraining devices, zip-tie handcuffs, the kind used in military police operations. "You want to know what someone who really works in classified operations told me?" she said, holding up the restraints. "They told me that people who lie about their military service, people who wear ribbons they never earned, people who claim achievements they never accomplished, those people are criminals." The crowd was completely silent now, watching as she approached me with the restraints. "Cassie, what are you doing?" I asked, backing away instinctively. "I'm making sure you can't run away this time. I'm making sure you can't disappear into another mysterious emergency or classified briefing when things get uncomfortable." She moved faster than I expected, grabbing my wrist and snapping one end of the zip tie around it before I could react. The plastic bit into my skin as she pulled my other arm behind the chair that had somehow appeared behind me. "Cassandra, stop!" our father shouted, pushing through the crowd. "This is going too far." "No, Dad," she said, securing the second restraint. "What went too far was letting her lie to us for 5 years. What went too far was making excuses for someone who's been laughing at us behind our backs." I was handcuffed to the chair now, unable to move, completely at her mercy. The humiliation was overwhelming, but it was about to get worse. "James, call base security," she ordered. "Tell them we have someone here wearing unauthorized military ribbons. Tell them we have someone impersonating an officer." "Cassie, no," I said desperately. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," she said coldly. "I'm exposing a fraud. I'm protecting the honor of people who actually serve their country honestly."
James was already dialing his phone. "Base security? This is Lieutenant Commander Rothwell. I need to report a case of stolen valor and false impersonation of military rank. We're at the Grandview Ballroom on 5th Street. The crowd was backing away now, as if my supposed crimes might be contagious. I could see people filming with their phones, capturing my humiliation for posterity. "Please," I said to the room in general, "someone call Admiral Hayes at Pacific Fleet Command. Tell her Admiral Thornfield needs immediate assistance." The laughter that erupted from the crowd was like a physical blow. "Admiral?" Cassandra said mockingly. "Now you're claiming to be an admiral? James, did you hear that? She just promoted herself from lieutenant commander to admiral in the span of 30 seconds. "That's the most pathetic thing I've ever heard," someone called out from the crowd. "She's completely delusional," another voice added. But then something unexpected happened. James's phone rang, and when he answered it, his expression changed completely. "Yes, sir?" he said into the phone, his voice suddenly tight with what sounded like panic. "Yes, sir, I understand. They're on their way?" "Yes, sir, right away, sir." He hung up and stared at his phone like it had just bitten him. "What's wrong?" Cassandra asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. "That was base security. They said they're dispatching a team immediately, but not for the reason I called." "What do you mean?" James looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fear? Confusion? Realization? "They said they need to secure the area because someone just contacted Pacific Fleet Command about a compromised admiral being held against her will." The ballroom went completely silent. "They asked me if Admiral Thornfield was safe and if her cover had been blown." Cassandra's face went white. "That's impossible. She's not an admiral. She can't be an admiral." "Ma'am," James said, and I could hear his voice shaking now, "they also said that a lieutenant commander questioning an admiral's orders without proper authorization is a court-martial offense." The sound of vehicles pulling up outside was audible through the ballroom windows. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, with the kind of authority that suggested this wasn't a routine response. "James," I said quietly, "when base security gets here, you're going to want to have a very good explanation for why you handcuffed a flag officer to a chair." The door to the ballroom burst open and 6 men in military police uniforms entered at a run, followed by an officer I recognized but had never seen in civilian company. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, my liaison with Joint Chiefs Operations, strode into the ballroom like she owned it. She took one look at me, handcuffed to the chair, then turned to face the crowd with an expression that could have frozen hell. "Which one of you," she said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "thought it would be amusing to restrain Admiral Lydia Thornfield?" The silence that followed Lieutenant Colonel Chen's question was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. 50 people stood frozen in place, their phones still recording, their faces shifting from excitement to dawning horror as the implications began to sink in. Cassandra was the first to break the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not possible. She can't be an admiral." "The records showed exactly what they were supposed to show," Lieutenant Colonel Chen said coldly, her eyes never leaving my sister's face. "Admiral Thornfield has been operating under deep cover for Operation Clearwater, one of the most sensitive intelligence operations in Pacific Fleet history." She gestured sharply to the military police, who immediately moved to cut the zip tie restraints binding me to the chair. As the plastic fell away from my wrists, I could see red marks where they had cut into my skin.
Ma'am, one of the MPs said respectfully as he helped me to my feet. Are you injured? Do you require medical attention? I'm fine, Sergeant, I replied, my voice steady despite everything. Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Chen pulled out an official document from her briefcase, her movements precise and military crisp. For the benefit of everyone present, I am authorized to read the following statement from Admiral Patricia Hayes, Commander, Pacific Fleet. She cleared her throat and began reading in a voice that carried to every corner of the ballroom. Admiral Lydia Thornfield has served with distinction in the United States Navy for 15 years, the last 5 of which have been spent coordinating classified intelligence operations vital to national security. Her cover assignment as an administrative officer was necessary to maintain operational security for activities that have directly resulted in the protection of American lives and interests. The crowd was stirring now, people whispering to each other, the reality of the situation beginning to penetrate their shock. Furthermore, Chen continued, Admiral Thornfield's commendations and decorations, including the Navy Cross and Defense Distinguished Service Medal, were earned through actions that remain classified but have been verified at the highest levels of military command. James had gone completely white. I could see him calculating the magnitude of his mistake, understanding that questioning an admiral's orders without proper authorization wasn't just embarrassing, it was a career-ending offense.
But Cassandra wasn't finished. Even faced with official confirmation, she couldn't let go of her narrative. "This is all fake," she said desperately, her voice rising to near hysteria. "It's all an elaborate cover-up to protect her lies. She's gotten the military to lie for her." Lieutenant Colonel Chen turned to face my sister with an expression of such icy professionalism that several people in the crowd actually took a step back. "Ms. Rothwell," she said, "are you suggesting that the United States Navy, Pacific Fleet Command, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff have conspired to create false documentation to cover up the lies of a lieutenant commander?" I don't know. That's not what Cassandra stammered, finally beginning to understand the hole she had dug for herself. "Because that would be an accusation of treason at the highest levels of military command," Chen continued relentlessly. "That would be suggesting that our nation's military leadership is corrupt and willing to falsify official records." Our father stepped forward, his face gray with shock and what looked like dawning humiliation. "Colonel, my daughter Cassandra didn't understand the situation. She was acting on incomplete information." "Captain Thornfield," she said, recognizing his rank and acknowledging him with professional courtesy, "with respect, your daughter accused a flag officer of stolen valor, had her physically restrained against her will, and called base security to report her for impersonating a military officer? Incomplete information doesn't excuse those actions." She turned back to address the entire room. "What happened here tonight represents a fundamental misunderstanding of military protocol, operational security, and the chain of command. More importantly, it represents a betrayal of family loyalty that I find deeply troubling." The crowd was completely silent now, and I could see people beginning to edge toward the exits, realizing they had witnessed something that was going to have serious consequences. But I wasn't done yet. This was my moment, and I had things that needed to be said. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen," I said formally, "may I address the gathering?" "Of course, Admiral." I stepped forward, feeling the weight of my real rank and authority for the first time in 5 years. When I spoke, it was with the voice I used in Pentagon briefings, the voice that had coordinated operations across 3 time zones and managed the safety of American operatives in hostile territory. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "for 5 years, I have served my country in ways that required me to sacrifice personal relationships, family connections, and my own reputation. I have missed holidays, birthdays, and yes, even my sister's wedding because the mission demanded it." I looked directly at Cassandra, who was now crying openly, whether from shame or continued anger, I couldn't tell.
I have let people I love think less of me rather than compromise operations that protect American lives. I have endured suspicion, disappointment, and finally, public humiliation because maintaining my cover was more important than maintaining my relationships. My voice grew harder, carrying the authority of someone who commanded respect from generals and admirals. But what I will not endure is being called a fraud by someone who chose to attack me rather than trust me. What I will not accept is being physically restrained and threatened with arrest by family members who decided their need for answers was more important than national security. I turned to James, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Lieutenant Colonel Rothwell, you accessed classified personnel files without authorization, shared that information with unauthorized personnel, and attempted to have a superior officer arrested based on your misunderstanding of what you found. Do you understand the implications of those actions? Yes, ma'am, he whispered, his military training overriding his personal embarrassment. I request permission to submit a formal apology and accept whatever disciplinary action. You'll have that opportunity, I said curtly. But right now, I want you to understand something. The reason those files showed routine administrative work is because that was my cover. The reason there were no deployment orders is because my actual orders are classified above your clearance level. The reason my performance reviews were mediocre because excellence in a cover identity draws unwanted attention. Every single piece of evidence you found proved exactly what it was supposed to prove, that Lieutenant Commander Lydia Thornfield was an unremarkable administrative officer with no significant achievements. Because Admiral Lydia Thornfield couldn't exist in official records that might be accessed by people without appropriate clearances. Finally, I turned back to my sister, this woman who had shared my childhood, who had once looked up to me with such love and pride. Cassandra, I said, and my voice broke just slightly. You were my sister. You were supposed to trust me even when you couldn't understand me. You were supposed to believe in me, even when I couldn't explain myself. Instead, you chose humiliation over trust. You chose public spectacle over private conversation. You chose to destroy me rather than believe in me. I straightened my uniform, every ribbon and medal now vindicated, every decoration now proven. That choice says more about you than 5 years of investigation could ever about me.
3 months later, I stood in the Pentagon briefing room that would become my new office, looking out at the Potomac River through windows that didn't require bulletproof glass or classified viewing restrictions. For the first time in 5 years, I was exactly who my nameplate said I was: Admiral Lydia Thornfield, Director of Pacific Intelligence Operations. The transformation hadn't been easy. Moving from deep cover back into public military life required extensive debriefings, psychological evaluations, and what the Navy diplomatically called readjustment counseling. But the hardest part wasn't adapting to my new role. It was dealing with the aftermath of that night at the Grandview Ballroom. James Rothwell received an official letter of reprimand and was transferred to a landlocked base in Nevada, effectively ending his submarine career. He'd sent me a formal written apology that was professionally correct but personally hollow. His marriage to Cassandra lasted exactly 6 weeks after the reception party. Apparently, discovering that your wife had orchestrated a public humiliation of a flag officer wasn't the foundation for lasting love. The fallout for Cassandra was more complex. She wasn't subject to military justice, but the video of her handcuffing me to a chair, recorded by at least 15 smartphones, had gone viral in military communities. She'd become an object lesson in what happens when civilians attack military personnel based on incomplete information. Her law firm quietly suggested she might be happier at a different practice. and she'd eventually relocated to Denver, where nobody knew her story. My parents had struggled with their own guilt and confusion. Dad, with his Coast Guard background, understood the concept of classified operations, but Mom couldn't reconcile the daughter she'd raised with the woman who'd been living a double life for 5 years. We'd been through family counseling, a surreal experience that involved explaining operational security to a therapist with appropriate clearances. But the most profound change was in how I saw myself. For 5 years, I'd defined my identity by what I couldn't reveal, who I couldn't be, what I had to sacrifice. I'd measured my worth by missions completed and operations secured, by lives saved in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged. I'd forgotten that there was a difference between serving your country and disappearing into your service. The morning of my Pentagon promotion ceremony, I'd stood in front of my mirror practicing the speech I would give to a room full of people who finally knew exactly who I was. No cover stories, no operational necessities, no classified restrictions on what I could say about my own achievements. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, addressing the assembled crowd of senior officers, Pentagon officials, and yes, my parents. 5 years ago, I accepted an assignment that required me to become someone else. Today, I'm grateful to become myself again. The ceremony was everything Cassandra's reception party hadn't been. Professional, respectful, proud. Admiral Hayes presented me with the Distinguished Service Cross, finally able to publicly recognize operations that had remained secret for years. The citation mentioned coordination of intelligence assets, successful extraction of compromised operatives, and protection of American interests in the Pacific Theater. My parents sat in the front row, tears streaming down their faces as they finally understood what their daughter had been doing while they thought she was filing reports and answering phones. After the ceremony, during the reception, Dad approached me with an expression I hadn't seen since I was a child. Pure, uncomplicated pride. "Admiral," he said formally, then broke into a smile. "My daughter, the Admiral." "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner," I said for probably the 100th time in 3 months. "Don't apologize for doing your duty," he replied. "I'm sorry we didn't trust you to do it right." Mom joined us, still looking slightly overwhelmed by everything she'd learned about my real career. "She keeps thinking about all the times I worried you weren't living up to your potential, all the times I wished you'd be more ambitious, more successful." "You were successful," Dad added firmly. "We just couldn't see it." The hardest conversation came later that evening when I was finally alone in my new apartment. A real apartment with my real name on the lease in a building that didn't require security clearances to visit. My phone rang. Cassandra's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since that night at the ballroom, hadn't exchanged so much as a text message during the 3 months of aftermath and revelation, but something made me pick up. "Lydia?" Her voice was small, uncertain. I need to..." She was crying again. "God, Lydia, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." I sat in silence, listening to her sob, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no forgiveness. Just empty space where my little sister used to be. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything," she continued. "I know I can't take back what I did to you, but I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I destroyed." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "You were protecting me. All those years, all that secrecy, you were protecting all of us. If anyone had known what you really did, we could have been targets. Our whole family could have been at risk."
It was true, though I'd never explained it that way. Operational security wasn't just about protecting missions, it was about protecting the families of people who worked on those missions. "I thought you didn't trust us," she whispered. "I thought you didn't think we were important enough to include in your life. But you were including us. You were keeping us safe by keeping us ignorant." "Cassie..." "No, let me finish, please." Her voice was steadier now, determined. "I spent 5 years resenting you for being distant. I convinced myself you thought you were better than us, more important than family. I never considered that maybe the distance was the sacrifice, not the reward." She paused, and I could hear her taking shaky breaths. "I destroyed the best person I ever knew because I was too selfish to trust her." The silence stretched between us, filled with 5 years of misunderstanding and 3 months of consequence. "I don't know how to forgive you yet. I don't know if I ever will. What you did to me that night, it wasn't just wrong, Cassie. It was cruel. I know. No, let me finish. You chose to humiliate me publicly rather than trust me privately. You chose to believe the worst about me rather than give me the benefit of the doubt. Those choices can't be undone." "I know," she repeated, her voice breaking. "But I want you to know something. Even when I couldn't tell you the truth, even when I had to let you think less of me, I never stopped loving you. Even when you handcuffed me to that chair, even when you called me a fraud in front of everyone we knew, part of me understood why you did it. Lydia, that doesn't mean I forgive you. It just means I understand that betrayal and love sometimes exist in the same space." We talked for another hour, carefully navigating the wreckage of our relationship, neither of us sure if it could be rebuilt, but both of us willing to try. When I hung up, I realized something had changed. For 5 years, I'd been Admiral Thornfield, pretending to be Lieutenant Commander Thornfield. Now, for the first time, I was just Lydia, a woman who'd served her country with honor, who'd protected her family through sacrifice, who'd learned that some prices are worth paying and others are too high to bear. The next morning, I reported to my Pentagon office, ready to coordinate Pacific Fleet intelligence operations under my real name with my real rank, surrounded by people who knew exactly who I was. But more importantly, I finally knew who I was, too. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't the ones that make headlines. Sometimes they're the quiet moments when you realize you've survived the worst betrayal possible and discovered that your integrity remained intact. Sometimes winning means knowing the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to keep. And sometimes the highest honor isn't the medal they pin on your chest. It's the moment you look in the mirror and respect the person looking back at you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.